But welcome everyone to the Ousley Scholar Residency Keynote of Tobias Wilson. For those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Atira Coleman. I work within the Office of Academic Diversity and Inclusiveness. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this heavily anticipated keynote. This event is brought to you by OADI and the Weisberg Program for Human Rights and Social Justice. The Ousley Scholar in Residency honors the legacy of Grace Ousley, which was the first Black woman to graduate from Beloit College. And so this is offered every year to a scholar, an activist, or an organizer who is committed to the theory and practice of social justice. So this is our second Ousley resident. I have had the pleasure of talking with Tobias over the last few months and more closely these last few days. And I'm so happy to bring them here to share their experiences, expertise, and critical perspectives on social justice. Tobias Wilson is a writer, a poet, a motivational speaker. I've definitely been motivated these last few days, and a scholar activist. They've been recognized as an emerging LGBTQ leader whose focus is on the intersections of compounding effects of race, law, sexuality, and gender in the United States. They have a law degree from Howard Law and is currently a PhD student in African American and American Studies. OADI selected Tobias because in the current political climate, it's important for our students to see individuals model how to effectively carry out social justice work, both academically and legally. Tobias has successfully found a way to combine their artistic passions with their academic gaze, which is really unique. And I'm excited for students to learn various ways to do this work while also prioritizing their own self-love. OADI's #HitWoke series for 18-19 school year will focus on speaking truth to power in the age of fake news. And in this era of fake news, it impacts what stories get heard and what stories get validated. It shapes who we empathize with and who we strip of their humanity. From a national scope to issues that we have all faced on this campus recently, this talk is important to recalibrate us and make us reflect on those who we advocate for, what problems we prioritize, and what bodies we value. So tonight, Tobias will be discussing the Black and Black queer gaze and how racial and sexual minorities can move beyond the inequitable demands of society, something that I think is very relevant to many of you here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Tobias Wilson to
acknowledge the ground that we stand on. Not only do we stand on stolen ground, but we stand on disturbed remains. I think it's important to note the bones that sit beneath us, around us, and the remnants of those that were taken from this land that was theirs, and the cost of that, the energy of that, and how that climate of anti-indigeneity affects the ways in which we experience this space that we are calling a schoolhouse on today. So if you can maybe just take a couple seconds to take that in. So before I started, I took a little bit of time to light some sage outside, to put some libations, to give honor to those that have gone on before us. And before I start any talk, I always like to give honor to my own ancestors. But since we are here in this space where others' ancestors are unmarked, unnamed, some are remained and some have been removed, I wanted to read a poem that I had experienced when I visited the Lynching Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. I think that this poem not only does a great deal of honor to those that were formerly enslaved and lynched, but also those that have been taken from spaces that were once their own, or remain their own. This is called Invocation by Elizabeth Alexander. The wind brings your names. We will never dissever your names. Not your shadows beneath each branch and tree. The truth comes in on the wind, is carried by the water. There is such a thing as the truth. Tell us Tell us how you got over. Say, soul, look back and wonder. Your names are never lost. Each name a holy word. The rock cries out. Call out each name to sanctify this place. Sound and human voices, silver or soil alone. A sorry song. A key, a capital, a harmony. A hymnal, a handbook, a chart. A sacred text, a song, an exhortation. Ancestors, you will still find us in cages here. Despised and disciplined. You will find us still misnamed. Here you will find us despot. You will not find us extinct. You will find us here memorial and story. You will find us here mighty. You will find us here divine. You will find us here memorial and story. You will find us here still mighty. You will find us where you left us, but not as you left us, ancestors. Here you endure and are luminous. You are not lost to us. The wind carries sorrow, sighs, and shouts. The wind brings everything. Nothing is lost. By Elizabeth Alexander. That's it. So, as we begin this piece, I want us to begin to think about critically the concepts of witnessing, memory, remembering, and testimony, particularly as they affect this land that we stand on, not just here in Wisconsin, but across the nation. I want you to think about witnessing, testimony, lashing, leashing, enslavement, colonialism, through the gaze not of those that have done that work, but through the gaze of those that have experienced it, as their descendants, as their remnants, as their re-memories of things that cannot be spoken. So as I go through this talk, this essay, this incantation, I want you to walk with me through this timeline that I've sketched out. And from there we'll get to some questions and answers. Don't be afraid to snap. Say yes, don't say anything, be distraught. It's all okay, so I'm about to be a little distraught too. So we begin with slavery. In the years since the end of chattel slavery, some 4,000 plus African Americans and/or black people in America have been lynched. Lynching refers to the extrajudicial killing of a person that is beyond the law, often but not only by hanging. These lynchings were and continue to be instances of racial sexual terror, occurring almost exclusively against black people as a way to terrorize or warn black communities, and usually involving some form of sexual mutilation. But beyond its racial and sexual nature, lynching operates as a form of social control, namely quieting the black witness to black humanity, white terrorism, and humane predilections. In short, lynching plays and continues to play an important, if not primary, role in tying the black tongue, erasing the black testimony, and obscuring the public record and experience of black insistence, resistance, and humanity. It does so while also quieting the echoes of white terrorism, sexual violence, and anti-black genocide as sports, politic, and fetish. Take a moment, just a moment, to meditate and hold and witness lynchings in moments of black insistence on dignity, being, and testifying. These are a series of testimonies. Private James Neely was lynched in Hampton, Georgia in 1898 for complaining when a white store owner refused to serve him. Nathan Bird was lynched in Luling, Texas in 1902 for refusing to turn his teenage son over to a mad mob. His son, accused of fighting a white boy, was also lynched. John Stoner was lynched in Dawson, Louisiana in 1909 for suing the white man who killed his cow. Mary Turner was lynched with her unborn child at Folsom Bridge at Brooks, Lowndes County in Georgia in 1918 for complaining about the recent lynching of her husband, Hayes Turner. Henry Patterson was lynched in LaBelle, Florida in 1926 for asking a white woman for a drink of water. Lacey Mitchell was lynched in Thomasville, Georgia in 1936 for testifying against a white man accused of raping a black woman. Ernest McGowan was lynched in Waller, Texas in 1937 for reporting a group of white men who attacked him. Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy, was lynched, shot, and dragged through multiple towns in Mississippi before being tossed in a river in 1955. He had been accused of listening at a white woman. In 2017, the white woman admitted to lying on Emmett Till. Lynching did not, and will not, end there. And neither does our duty to defend ourselves, to defend the dead, and to defend those that come after us. Oscar Grant, a 22-year-old black man, was lynched, unarmed, lying face down with an officer on his back in Oakland, California, in a train terminal on New Year's Day of 2009. Officer Johannes Messeller later pled not guilty to murder and was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, accidentally causing death in legal terms. Rekia Boyd, a 22-year-old black woman, was lynched in Chicago, Illinois in 2012 when an angry white man shot into a crowd. She was lynched for being present. Renisha McBride, a 19-year-old black woman, was lynched in Dearborn Heights, Michigan for knocking on a white man's door for help after she pulled herself, dazed, bloody, and confused, from a car accident outside his house. In 2017, an 8-year-old biracial black child survived a lynching by a group of teenage white boys in his middle school in Claremont, New Hampshire, cutting himself from a tree. In May of 2018, Raymond Smith and Jaron Moreland, both 21 years old, were lynched in Oklahoma City by 3 white men near a gun cell after racking or cocking his gun to make sure it worked, aka injecting the entry cartridges, a routine exercise in gun sales. Waukesha Wilson was found hanging in an LAPD cell on Easter Sunday in 2016. She was lynched. No one went to jail. The city agreed to pay $300,000 to the family, but failed to take responsibility. She was lynched. No one went to jail except her aunt, Sheila Hines Grimm, when she decided to bear witness to her niece's lynching to say her name to defend the dead. On May 8, 2018, Sheila, her aunt, was arrested after walking into a city hall meeting and throwing the ashes of her disappeared niece on an LAPD police chief, explaining, "That's Waukesha. She's going to stay with you," as she walked away. She was later arrested for battering a police officer. Ms. Grimm says, "I used her ashes so they could be with him, so he could feel her because he murdered her. They covered it up," she said. When asked if she had any regrets, she simply said, "No." Sheila intended to defend the dead. She intended to bear witness. She came to testify. No cost was as heavy as silence. Niggas shouldn't be going to jail for doing the right thing. But it is what it is. We're taking a stand and we're going to be there. This was said on Monday, October 3rd, 2016. These were the final 3 words of Ramsey Orta, the Latinx brother who witnessed and filmed the lynching of Eric Garner, en route to sentencing from Rikers Island as he prepared to relinquish his freedom once again. He was first arrested, and what he knows is a campaign of false charges of police harassment, just 1 month after the recording of Eric Garner's death. He was arrested again a year later with his mother, brother, and sister in the same area that Eric Garner was stolen. I ask you then to consider, here and now, always, already, what is the cost of witnessing and defending the dead? The dead that we know, the dead we speak of, but also the dead that you have here, have grown comfortable standing on, walking on, and collecting silently on your walls. What do we say to the inhabitants of the earth beneath us? Those that remain and those who have been removed. What type of schoolhouse can be built on the bones of the unspoken? The sites of the unseen, spiritual places turned into lawn chairs for graduation, for play spaces for the children of professors hiding in bliss. How can we think, dream, and midwife a social justice space, a space where education is the practice and the birthing of freedom, where fact overtakes so-called fake news, when we cannot honor and defend the dead and the dying in our midst? The land is unsettled. And so is this climate of anti-blackness, this land of indigenous erasure and disregard that we find ourselves fighting for a stable justice in, an endurable peace in, and a beloved community that remains elusive, if only aspirational. In this piece, I hope to echo the call of my friend and mentor, Dr. Christina Sharp, and proclaiming that we too must defend the dead, the living dead and the dead who walk without a material body. I want us to posit Black witnessing as a form of insistence on Black being, a remembering of what is lost and stolen and lynched, those pieces of us that remain as testimony against schools, employers, governments, police, and individuals who strike blows against Black, queer, Latinx, indigenous, and other bodies and communities in economic, social, and corporeal terms. I want to think about Black witnessing as a type of quick work and an exaltation, an example of thinking Blackly, that is thinking through embodied knowledges and experiences from slave ships to mass incarceration. Through the Black and beyond the white gaze, I also want to insert here the concept of the Black queer, existing as two colliding and oppositional identities, not as two colliding and oppositional identities, but as a gumbo of compounded and conforming realities, ontologies and ways of seeing, of being, and thinking. For that reason, Black and queer become one word, Black queer, spelled B-L-A-Q-U-E-E-R, destabilizing fixed notions of queerness and Blackness, of gender and other, of intersections and discrete identities. It functions as a unique site of testimony, of witnessing on multiple registers, of performance of self that is neither fixed or imaginary, yet always already subject to discipline. The disciplining of this witnessing works as a nation-making process. The furtherance of white mythologies of the American daydream and attendant progress narratives, while the practice of Black witnessing functions as a racial justice prosecutor of the racist American state, as we know it. However, witnessing and testimony are not simply about systems and about death. They are also about announcing right and wrong, about the insistence on Black humanity. These acts of witnessing, of testimony, of insistence, happen daily without ceasing, yet the discipline continues as well. We need look no further than last week's portrayal of Serena Williams as a supersized, angry, subhuman Black being. For the curious charge of protesting disproportionate discipline by a white coach, she was fined thousands of dollars, assessed for her game, and publicly humiliated. This trespass, this crime, was not simply about the truth of her argument, but that she felt so free, that she dare feel so human to argue at all. To put this simply, her assertion of her humanity, her insistence on fairness, decency, and equity, resulted in a transmutation of herself from human to beast. From athlete in perfect shape to larger than life, just like Mike Brown, beast in need of discipline, if not removal from the land of the living. The witnessing of Black women, of their own oppressions and that of other people of color, inclusive of queer and trans folk across the spectrum, has long functioned as America's mirror to the logic of those who call her Make America Great Again. And what of the site of schooling? What do we make of the university? Universities have proven uniquely skilled in teaching Black folk and non-Black people of color, as well as queer folk and women, innovative ways to hate themselves and or self-destruct quietly with grace. What is the role of witness? What is the role of testimony? Of speaking truth to power in this space. What truth can be spoken when the bones of the land are unseen and used as decoration for the comfort of the knowing unknowing? If bones and skeletons can be erased, if the products of those that's departed labor and culture can be placed on shelves as teachable, achievable moments, archivable seconds, yet always already nameless, what then can be said of the fleeting echoes of our own voices? This is the challenge of our being, to be, to speak, and to note. Even when proclaimed to be anything but human, everything but presence, and always ripe for consumption, to be seen as knowledge, as erotic, or as otherworldly, unhuman being. not one simply of passive argument, and neither is it one of free labor. While Black students and other racial sexual minorities continue to exist as unparalleled sites of embodied knowledge, unspoken and unbossed, it can never be assumed that it is the duty of those closest to the pain and inequity to unteach and unlearn those who unleash the power and trauma. When professors say nigger or nigga in class, it is not up to the singular or collective Black students to teach them of the racial and sexual embodied terror of their words. It is not a moment for a voice vote or a teachable moment. Black pain is not a teachable moment. Latinx unbelonging is not a site of pondering. Queer subjugation is not an interesting juncture. The myth and mystery of the magical minority that exists as singularly strong, brilliant, and willing and able to repurpose and remake the vitriol of white supremacy is neither a positive stereotype or a complement of promising abilities. This sort of tokenization works as a coercive extension of social capital that requires and demands the absence of the witnessing of one's own trauma, one's own truth, one's own ability to speak on the behalf of the dead, the living dead in one's own self. Tongues retied. The tragedy of this, the demands that students of color be transmutated into chalkboards inscribed with teachable moments, is that there are no trigger warnings for those accustomed to the guns of society on their temple. There are no awards for surviving while others in brilliance. Blackness is not a category of excellence for those who grade us by our ability to be consumed without complaint. There is no hiding place for racial sexual minorities on universities, on burial grounds and former plantations. There are only opportunities to defend the dead and become our ancestors' wildest dreams. The seeds of flowers long since departed, hell-bent on flight, freedom, and the politics of being undeterred, unbought, and unbossed. This means investing in a critical love ethic, a self-care regimen, and a practice of watering and protecting one's own spiritual garden. Just because you are gifts to the world doesn't mean that you are owned by it. Your freedom was once stolen and yet bought and paid for anew. This is the freedom to exist. But more than that, to survive, to thrive with compassion, and a little bit of style, as the great Maya Angelou once said. Yet this is more than freedom, a debt to be paid to those who came before you. You are the remnants of your ancestors, their emissaries on earth, the proof of the daring and their coming divinities. This is your moment. This is your calling, your duty to be the dream your ancestors could never imagine. Be the tongue they couldn't have. Be so fleeting, so free, so irreverent that it shakes the concepts of respectability and normalcy to their core. If flight and the ability to move freely are the language of freedom, witnessing is the language and the weapon of justice. Put differently, the silent yells of the lynched, both then and now, the quieting of Black and Latinx testimony and cutting off of people of color's tongues provide the foundation and barricades for the house of anti-Blackness. And as they are mobilized, called home, remembered and made free, the house of oppression loses its hold. Modern instances of lynching continue to render us invisible and terrorized. It is the power of our testimony, the demand that terror they wrought is going to stay with them, as Sheila said, that gives us both care and freedom. This is how we protect the living. This is how we defend the dead. We live, we testify, we witness, and we carry each other carrying on as if our lives depended on it. Because they always have, and they always will. And your voice is the only testimony of record. Thank you.
mics going around. One, where's the second? Right here. It's open for you to engage with Tobias at the moment. That's the first question.
Also, your questions don't have to be about the talk. They can be about, I was going to say anything, but I know that'll be academic stuff. No, they can be about most things. If it ain't right, I'll be like, nah, girl, I ain't doing that. Yeah. Questions, comments, reactions, other thoughts, feelings.
Hi. Hello. Hello. So my question is concerning something that I know my friends and I, who are queer people of color, are struggling with, which is...
Can you say your name first?
Adrian.
Adrian, very nice to meet you, love.
Nice to meet you. So something that my friends of color and I, queer and not queer, are thinking about and talking about is how to separate finding ourselves as attractive and beautiful from being fetishized. I know that's a very big question, right? I'm not asking you to solve the whole thing in one day or one conversation. But I guess my question is, like, what is your thoughts on that? So, like, how have you, if you have, found a way to think about this?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've been black and queer for a very long time. I think that there's two separate issues, right? There's finding yourself beautiful and sexy and attractive. So attractive when you get out of the shower, you look at yourself in the mirror, you lotion up like, yeah, that's me. That's how you should always feel. But then there is the lens of those that are seeking you, right? And we were actually talking about this, I believe, at lunch earlier today. So there's a difference between your own gaze and the gaze of those that seek you. But you have to learn how to do is censor your own gaze, right? Because at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, you are who you see. You are who pays for your hair to be styled and outside. I don't know how you want to get down. You know, you are the one who pays for your clothes. You are the one who must love yourself. So the question then becomes, how developed is your love ethic, your love regimen, your love practice? And obviously, when you meet somebody, you don't always know from the beginning of the vibe how they actually feel about you. But don't be afraid to ask the question. You're a beautiful queer person of color, so you get to ask the question, how do you see me? Why do you see me, and why do you seek me? Announce your purpose here. And it might sound awkward, but once you really start to look in that mirror and know how you look, and know what you got, you realize you can't let someone run away with all of your stuff. So you ask why they're there, and you check their resume.
So, my name is Pascal. What's up?
Hey, how you doing?
What's your take on hypermasculinity in the black community? You know, as like, you got a tip for like young brothers so they can know that they can be affectionate towards one another, you know?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, I don't take hypermasculinity. I'm like, ah, boy. No, but for a real analysis, it's like, first of all, we have to think about where that comes from. Right? We have to think about what Hortense Spillers has always called the ungendering of black people. Right? So masculinity, femininity, and these kind of gender constructs generally were imposed upon black people through the slave trade, right? But it was also the idea that you would never reach masculinity or femininity because those were white. You'll never be white. So we have to think about this striving for hypermasculinity as a striving for humanity. Right? And when you are hypermasculine, it does a couple of things oftentimes. For many people, it makes you more attractive. And people think you're more sexually virile, which is intriguing, hasn't been my experience. Anyway, third point is that like the real important work of hypermasculinity is that it says you are incapable of being the target. Right? If you think someone is crazy and capable of giving you a beat down, guess what you're not going to do? Try them. Right? So hypermasculinity is not just this kind of like psychosis of black men. It's actually a very logical thing, even though it's harmful. Right? It's logical insofar as like people are not going to rob you on the street. No one's going to try you. Right? Even people in your family are not going to try you. And particularly if you're a black queer person and you're hypermasculine, that can oftentimes shield you from queer antagonistic behavior. Right? So I think that when we're engaging with hypermasculinity, we first have to engage with the quest for humanity. You know? Because not all hypermasculinity is violent. Sometimes it's simply defensive. You know? So we have to stop looking at people that we think are hypermasculine and being afraid of it, because they're not always the one building the sword. Sometimes it's our own assumptions about their bodies. But I think there's a difference between hypermasculinity and toxic masculinity, right? The inability to feel another masculine person, whether we're talking about physically or whether we're talking about emotionally or spiritually. There's a certain problem when you're a father and you can't hold your son's hand when he's going through something. What has been cut off from your humanity? And how, right? Because that's probably what I call a godless circumcision, a type of cutting off of self that isn't done by self. Who held the blades? How do we go about healing? And healing and toxic masculinity and hypermasculinity are all community productions. So where were you in the play when toxic masculinity came on stage? So that's my last answer.
Hi, we got some speaker lunch. I was really glad to be a part of that lunch. It was a really great talk, a really great conversation. In case you forgot, my name is Chloe.
I remember you, Chloe. You wanted questions about your hello.
Actually, I'd like to ask those two questions that I had.
See?
Yeah, see?
No, go ahead.
Okay. My very first question has to do with racial ambiguity in terms of people that pass as white or people who are adopted and have very complicated or maybe non-traditional racial structures around them.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any comment that you can put out in terms of call-out culture, in terms of how to validate those experiences as well, without, do you see where I'm going with that?
I don't know how you want me to address call out, but I get the rest of the comment. Are those two separate or are those interlinked? How you think about it?
I would say those are interlinked in the sense that I've noticed that not necessarily just on this campus, but also on social media, it's very common for people to want to jump and try to correct the other person based on what they've said. And I will admit that in a lot of cases, this is, worthy and it's important, but as a person who is mixed and also who has friends that are racially ambiguous, I don't want their stories of blackness to be silenced just because they're white passing. They have a long history of violence as well, and that comes with its own costs.
I get that. You're talking about the validity of mixed and multiracial black people's voices. How does that testimony get heard? Does it get taken up at all? And the violence of the ways in which it's disheveled. So I will just tell a quick little story. So my great-grandmother used to always tell me a story about her grandmother, Elizabeth, who was born slaves in Missouri before they escaped to Kansas. They stole a train, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, so one of the stories that my grandfather would always tell my great-grandmother is that he went to town one day and he saw his mother. And he called her name, but because she passed as white, and he was darker skinned, she could not turn around and greet him because that could have gotten him lynched. Right? So we can think about racially ambiguous and white passing black folks as having different type of maneuvering ways through anti-black worlds and also through white supremacist spaces. But that doesn't mean they're not experiencing anti-black worlds and white supremacist spaces, right? So my grandmother in that instance would not have been in danger of being lynched. But she could have been in danger of being raped for a white woman engaging with a black child in a particular way. Or worse, or maybe worse, I can't really compare those, so I don't admit that comment. But differently, she could have had to watch her own child be lynched, and perhaps her husband. And that is a type of violence too, right? So like earlier in the talk, I talked about witnessing, but there's the violence and sometimes having to be the one to witness these, what is her name? Help me somebody. She wrote Lose Your Mother, See the Subjection, City of Heart. Yes, what she calls a scene of subjection, right? These are these types of scenes where someone is being oppressed and also unallowed to speak to it, because to speak its name is a type of terror. So I think there are a couple of things that go on in these, and this is really important, we were doing this earlier, these kind of intraracial dynamics among black people, and differently. Like, there's a huge, beautiful diaspora, we're all the same, go figure. And so I think that sometimes you have these people that are seen as stereotypically clearly black, and those that are seen as maybe not black or racially ambiguous, as an innate distrust of not wanting to be harmed. But I think it is our duty sometimes to say, yo, how do you identify? And that can be jarring because a lot of people are probably going to have to ask how they identify, and that can be in the front. But we actually have to be okay with clearing the land and saying who's in the room with me. And that has to be all right. We have to be okay with hearing that question, and also in asking it, because you want to know, I don't believe in safe spaces, but you want to know what is safer. And should you invest in this person? So I think that is a big part of the problem. And call-out culture, as we spoke about earlier in Charlie's class, is very interesting to me. I think about call-out, call-in, disposability in different grounds. I think no black person is disposable, no person of color is disposable. I've never been a person called that's trash. I think you're all unique in the creative potpourri of the universe. But that aside, I think that like call-out culture is important when you're talking about someone in a position of power. Someone that's not in your community, someone that you're not invested in calling. So you call them out because you don't want to call them into the sacred space, right? I believe that when you talk about holding people personally accountable, you can only hold people accountable that you've once held in love, right? The other ones you can't reach, so you call them out because they're outside of your realm of influence. So I think that when we're talking about other black people, people of color, perhaps other people that are white allies, or also queer, also trans, or whatever it may be, also immigrant, undocumented, what have you, if you are connected, I think it is your duty first, if you love them, to call them in to love. But if you don't love them, then when it gets your time, say, let's leave with that. It's not your duty to save everybody, you know? And it's also your duty to not put yourself in places where people don't want to save you. No one exit the room, because all skin folks and kind folks. So what else we got going on? All these like half hands, y'all so cute. Why are you scared?
Hi. I was wondering if you had any advice for people on the trans spectrum that were thinking about going further into academia, just for like surviving and like being more open in that kind of space with their identity and like maintaining the courage to do it.
Yeah. So I identify my gender as black queer. I can't speak to the trans spectrums that identify as trans, but what I can say is I think it'd be a mighty long road. I think that anyone who is any type of other in academia has a hard road to hoe, as I said, I can't say. And I think I would say to you is what I would say to any black or black queer person. Know who you are and know who you ain't. Think about how you're going to allow people to trust you. Think about what your borders around your sanity are. Think about how your work exists in the world and how differently your work exists in the world than your spirit, right? Because academia is a machine, and it will consume you if you let it, particularly if you're not the average cis straight white male, right? That comes from 50,000 Ivy League backgrounds and years of wealth. You're shiny, you're cute, we could show you off and then consume you, but be quiet when it hurts. But be aware, because when you know your worth, you know where and where not to enter, where and where not to step, what is safe for you and what's not, and establish your tribe. There may be other trans people, it may be people of color, it may be any type of other background you have, people you're not connected to at all. But your duty is always to love yourself, to create a practice of love, and to demand that those that are in your space also share that practice. You get to demand that. You must demand that.
Earlier in your speech, you kind of stumbled us at this one point, speaking about blackness and queerness, either acting in or not acting in oppositional ways. And I was hoping you could, I missed the point of that. I was hoping you could briefly elaborate on how they might parallel or oppose each other.
Yeah.
What context may be.
Oh yeah, I was trying to behave myself in that part, because I know when I talk about black queerness, I can just throw the whole paper away and be like, out of here. So I was thinking about blackness and queerness as sometimes they're thought about in society as things that are not, that are in opposition. But I posit this thing with black queerness, one word together, B-L-A-Q-U-E-R-S, black queers, as a type of, not intersection, which I love hearing the Crenshaw, that's not where I'm going, but a type of compounded or gumminess, right? Because blackness destabilizes when we think about it as a human and as gender. Queerness does the same thing, but sometimes does it with race as well, and other types of performance. So when you put them together, you have this mash, this gumbo of black queerness, and ends up being what kind of Du Bois called a duality of double-sidedness, to be able to see black side, white side, at this point too, queer side, and all these things. So what I'm thinking about in terms of black queerness is this worldview of the interconnected notions of oppression, and not just that they're interconnected, but also that they're compounded, they all reinform each other, right? And so not only what oppresses you, but also what lifts you up. So when we begin to think about communities that sustain us, we think about institutions that sustain us, think about things that give us life, we're thinking about them not only from a black perspective, but as a queer perspective. A queer perspective that is blackened and a black perspective that is queer. Always, already, not at axes, but at every single moment that you take your breath. You gotta follow it.
No,
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna have to jack that earring though. We're supposed to be in community. All these scratching tickets. Don't just get it right your hands. Okay.
Hello.
There you go.
Hey. Sonia Maria, also known as Dr. Johnson.
Hey, wear my clothes.
Thank you. Would you please elaborate on this idea and practice of love as not only self-liberation, but community healing? Because there's more inside of that, and I think that's something we've been working with in our own community here. Could you really press into that and talk about that practice?
Yes.
As radical intervention to humanity?
Yes. So when I think about what I'm entitling a critical love ethic, I'm building upon the work of Bell Hooks' love ethic. And I'm also in conversation with Audre Lorde's old quote that waking up in the morning. It's active resistance. But I am trying to move past existence and resistance as politics. What I'm trying to move to is thriving. That every moment should be a moment of thriving. That is not to say that you're not going to have a bad day and you'll be like, you know what, I'm done today. I see LA coming to work early, I ran outside, I feel a little inspired. But it is to say that in every moment you demand that you have access and the choice to live your best life, right? And that looks like you taking care of yourself always. And this isn't this kind of selfishness that we hear in like liberalism and like capitalism. We're not talking about capitalist self-love. What we're talking about is the idea when you invest in yourself, you're already invested in your community. Because a critical love ethic is not just an ethic that says, I care about me, I love my hair, I look good, I eat healthy, I got a nice house. But it is saying the ways in which I purchased this house on this block, how does it not only not do no harm, but also how does it elevate the rest of the folks on my block or those that I want to come on into the block with me? Right? So the critical love ethic insists on your love being intersectional and compounded. Right? Critical love ethic insists on a black queer politic. So it's saying that when I enter in love, whether it's romantic or in friends or in community, that romantic love has an effect. It is in conversation with my community love. It is in conversation with my fraternal love for my friends, right? It's in conversation with the ways in which I show up for my family, but it's also in conversation with the jobs I choose to take, the ways in which I begin to be capital, the ways in which I spend the days of my life on this earth. And it's also the ability to always say no when you need to say no, even if you don't want to say no. Because what we see for communities of color, particularly women of color, particularly Black and Latinx and Indigenous women, is that they don't live long. They carry whole communities on their back. Didn't Gloria Anzalula once write this bridge called My Back? The bridges have been rebuilt, but they remain trampled on. Right? And so for us, for folks that are non-women, that hopefully are in a critical love ethic relationship with women, your duty then becomes to make sure that there is no bridge to be walked on. Right? That the bridge becomes a tower. You know? So I want us to begin to think about this love ethic, this critical love ethic, as something that is not just about this kind of capitalistic self-righteous of a bubble bath. And I'm the king of bubble baths. Like, I take a bubble bath every night. I do it in a hotel. You know what I'm saying? But I have my lavender, my Malbec. I'm talking about too much. But anyway, I live like a slide from that bubble bath with my little pool to the side. Now, is that that is not all it is. That love is not just affective, it's not just getting your little massage. And sometimes it's not that often you can afford it. What it is making sure that the days that you live are the best days you can live. Loving yourself means always already being prepared and demanding that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams and beyond. The things they can never conceive of. You are a remnant. You are a promise. You are a dream that was never dreamed. It's your duty to be there. And that's what love looks like. To always be great forever. And to make space for those that come next. Oh, I knew he was coming.
Hello, that's me again.
Come on, Adele. Hey.
So my question is, like, how do you navigate spaces in academia where you're silenced, or when you do speak up, you're seen as an angry Black person? So how do you, like, how would you navigate that space, or how would you, if you have any advice for us to navigate those spaces where we're silenced or seen as angry?
Yeah, I just hate to break it to you, but you lack. Anytime that you are standing outside of what people in power say, you're going to be angry. We've seen as such. You're going to look disheveled. Whenever you have feelings, they're going to be seen as out of control. There's something in Black and brown skin that, for some reason, terrifies people. I don't think we're the ones with the delusions, but, that's just what some people's eyeballs do, I suppose. But no, I think the reality is that's going to happen to you, right? And what you should do right now is not accept the rightness of that, but accept that that's going to happen to you and decide how you're going to engage it. You can fight it in the beginning. You can go home and you can self-medicate. I don't recommend that, but that's what some people do. But what you should do is realize, that's like what Toni Morrison said, that these type of instances of white supremacy are not your business. This psychosis is not your concern, right? And obviously it will have effects on you, but how deeply it affects on you is up to you. But the reality is very material cost, right? When you are seen as the angry Black woman, or a queer person, or a person of color, or what have you, your pay might be docked. You may not get tenure. You may not be available to get that director of a center or program. And what does that mean to you, right? So there are moments where you're going to have to be strategic, but you have to decide when a pound of flesh is too much. And for you, there may never be a pound of flesh. You may be like, I'm not doing that, No, you work too, right? Because people are always going to try to talk you out of your work, particularly as a Black woman, particularly as a brilliant Black woman. The more brilliant you are, the more people will try you. So just be ready for that inverse relationship. But from speaking to you already, I know that you got this. So sit back, make your plan, keep doing what you've been doing. You've been Black for a long time now. You got this. Ain't no different in the real world. You just get paid this stuff.
Hi, I'm Jen Esperanza, known as Professor Esperanza here on campus. Thank you for prefacing your talk with acknowledging the space that we're in, acknowledging the bones that are here, the souls that are still on this place, because I think that's a decolonizing approach.
Yeah.
And so I wanted your thoughts on the future of practicing this kind of decolonization, of acknowledging the ugly history, and for some folks, thinking it as airing your dirty laundry. There's a discomfort when that happens, when you air that history. So what might that look like in terms of acknowledging this on the daily, finding spaces and ways to air that laundry, or however we want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, when you're calling airing your dirty laundry, I'm calling testifying and witnessing, right? And I think that's incumbent. I think that any person of color that's in the United States is either witnessing and testimony. Whether we're talking about Japanese people in internment camps, whether we're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, whether we're talking about mass genocide, ongoing genocide, I would argue against indigenous people, Black folks, I'm just going to say Black folks, and uncensoring of people that have been here before the border moved, right? They've been called different names now. Queer folks that were, whose consensual sex has been made illegal until 2006. There's some really interesting things in this nation, but I think I want to start addressing that again by saying Beloit is just dead wrong. There's no reason People should be standing on stolen land with people's bones in the land, and their artifacts in a gallery, and their caves restored for tourism and research. And no one says anything about it, or no one acknowledges or honors it, right? There should be these mounds, yo, should be protected. I should not be able, and before I came here, I went and put some libations and brought some sage, because I think you always honor the dead or the land that you come to, particularly when they're standing in your face. But I should not have been able to walk up and pour libations. There should have been a placard there. They should have been blocked off with barriers that you don't have no business jumping over. There should have been said, stop and take a moment to acknowledge and honor. Every time someone enters Beloit, before they get to the mountain, say, wait a minute, this is who is here. And we don't know their names. So everywhere on the border of this campus, we're going to remind you, this is who was here, and this is who made it before being removed. And so within that, I say Beloit is doing a piss poor job of acknowledging the veterans of this country. I'll also say this. It's really interesting to try to have a diversity statement or a statement of inclusion.
Get him.
When you're standing on bones you won't speak about. If you can ignore bones, as I said before, how easy is it to ignore a voice that flees, that echoes, that seems to stop as soon as we leave this room, as soon as you close your mouth? There are mounds outside. There's a cemetery outside. I don't see no flowers, I'm from Kansas City, what do I know? We respect the dead, I guess. I think that when we talk about the daily practices, though, it is not only the acknowledgement, I think that's the first step. But then how do you put that witnessing, that testimony into action? Because when you witness, or when you testify to a story, my background is criminal law. So when I'm in court and I have a witness come up to the court, I'm having the witness for a purpose. We want to do something. Usually it's for an acquittal or to prove a fact, or it's to further, if I'm in civil law, a type of settlement, and that settlement is supposed to change the facts on the ground. So when you are witnessing, maybe the first time it's just to be like, wait a minute, something ain't right. I don't know what ain't right, but I know something in my spirit just ain't right, and that's okay too. Maybe you do a little bit more research. But once you get past that stage, it's your duty to act, particularly as scholars, particularly as scholar activists, particularly as creatives, right? Because this is the things that you work with to kind of reproduce or produce a better or other world. This is your duty. So I think that how you do this daily is to practice witnessing, practice testimony, and demand a change. Because it can't be like universities are their favorite thing. Let's have a little town hall, girl. Let's write an email. Provo City email with 18 paragraphs that he may even read. But that cannot be, the practice. There has to be timelines and deadlines and deliverables. Just like when I want my assignment on time, I want a barricade on time. Don't be shy.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm Brittany. I'm a junior here. I've kind of been dealing with that whole overpacking your schedule because everybody wants a piece of what I brought to the table, right?
Because you see yourself, you know who you are. They're hungry.